So in terms of what we're going to be covering in this panel, we're going to be talking about, well, pretty much everything that we've covered so far, but going and getting a few extra voices onto it. So taking a look at the value that marketing and PR as well can bring to your games business in particular. Melissa is messaging in the chat at the moment. Go on, Leon.
Link. 1 second.
No worries. This is very thrilling. So I reckon it's probably not going to take Leon that long to actually pull Melissa up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the introductions, and we're going to live with life on the edge. So I'm George. I'm Ukie's head of communications. Let's go to MJ first. MJ, would you like to let us know a little bit about you?
Yes, of course. Hi, I'm MJ, and I'm a founder and creative director at Yours Truly. We're an award-winning agency that deals primarily with content and community within tech and gaming spaces. And what makes us a little bit different is that our aim is to make the industry more inclusive and diverse. So the primary thing about us is that we want to reach new audiences with gaming. We don't want to go after audiences that are already established gamers. What we want to do is we want to bring more people to gaming and show them that gaming is for everyone and everyone can enjoy gaming in some aspect or another. And that's a philosophy we take to all the campaigns that we do and all the work that we produce. And that's a philosophy that we back by data as well. So yeah, that's about it, I believe.
Fantastic. And James, would you like to let us know a little bit about yourself?
Will do, George. Be a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm James Kaye. I'm co-founder of Big Games Machine. We're a London-based or UK-based PR agency. We work at a global level targeting media and influencers. We absolutely do consumer campaigns across mobile, console and PC, but we also have a very heavy focus and speciality or specialism in B2b as well. So we do both sides of the coin in games PR.
Fantastic. And we will be covering both sides of those coins very, very shortly, but we're going to finish off with just a quick introduction as well from Melissa as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Melissa. I am head of client strategy at Game If You Are. We're a PR and marketing agency focusing on indie games of all shapes and sizes. So everything down to, solo developers releasing their first game up to some quite substantial publishers as well. So we're a full service agency. We do everything from creative to PR to influencers. So I'll be definitely coming at this from a bit of a holistic perspective.
Fantastic. And we're going to go in with the first question. And I have a feeling that I know what the kind of answers are going to be to this question based on the people that you are and which companies you come from. But how important is PR and marketing, do you think, James? I'm going to go to you first.
I think it's incredibly important, George. No, I think it's interesting because I do have times where I get people questioning the value of PR. I always say that I think, PR is often the glue that binds a lot of the marketing mix together. So there are some people that come to us and they put their entire stock in PR, which I'm always quite nervous about because they view it as a direct response tool, which it isn't. But it's definitely, stating the obvious, it's there to generate awareness for your game. It's there to create buzz. It's there to create hype. But the other thing as well is, increasingly a lot of our clients are also spending money on paid influencer campaigns, on Facebook campaigns. And so, like I said, I view it as well as the glue that kind of binds all those bits together and informs people's purchasing decisions. But yeah, I think PR is incredibly important for creating that buzz and that hype around your game. And best of all, it can be free. It may sound like a complete paradox or antithesis to me being an agency, but I also always say to people, you can do it yourself. I see a lot of developers who do a brilliant job of landing really great coverage for themselves. It's just a case of you don't know what you don't know. And so I think a lot of developers go to agency because they probably didn't realize when they tried to do it how incredibly time consuming and challenging it can be. But I'll never make out it's an incredible black art that developers can't do if they just put their mind to it and give it a try.
Of course, that's very magnanimous of you, James. But
well,
Melissa,
I like to be, George.
You very much like to be, but Melissa as well. What do you make of that question as well? And in terms of, as well, a little bit about that distinction too, because I think obviously the two, PR and marketing, obviously come very regularly hand in hand, but there is a bit of difference, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, I would see PR as one element of marketing, right? So you know, marketing for me can include everything from your creative, you know, production, things like, you know, making a trailer is part of your game marketing, right? That's, you know, the copy you put on your Steam page is part of your marketing, your social media. Whereas PR, I would see, is quite a specific subsection of that, which is, you know, contacting press. And I do include influencers under the same umbrella of PR. I know some people might put it as a separate section. But yeah, I would say that it was that specific outreach to content creators either in kind of publications, you know, journalists and writers and so on, you know, video journalists as well, or also influencers. Is that sort of external outreach side of things. I mean, I do think it is very important, which is not just so I can continue to pay my bills and to keep myself in the lifestyle to which I've become accustomed. I do think that you can make a fantastic, if no one's never gets to play it, then, you know, it's kind of, if a tree falls in the woods and doesn't make, you know, no one hears it, doesn't make a sound. I completely agree with what James was saying. Like, there are a lot of things that developers can do themselves and do in-house. And in fact, I'd go even further than that. Developers have to be involved in the process to do really effective PR and marketing. I think especially with indie games, you know, people want to hear about you as a creator. They want to hear about your personality and why you made the decisions you did for the game. They don't necessarily want something that's just been kind of crafted in a bubble separate. So the more that you as a developer can put into your PR and marketing, even with the support of an agency or, you know, a freelancer or someone you hire in-house, the better results you're going to get, because it'll be infused with that personality.
Yeah, can completely agree. And in terms of my perspective, I mean, I tend to do big stories, you know, about the sort of macro level of the industry and what's going on. And I can tell you that almost every single time we've secured successful national press coverage or something like a BBC radio placement or TV, we've had a case study. We've had a developer telling their story. We've had something that we can very clearly latch that onto, because it takes the impersonal and makes it personal, so you can explain it much more easily. You know, that's literally what the BBC do when they're telling stories. They say, we want the doorway to that wider story. So if you get both, it's ideal. MJ, I'm going to actually shift you into the second question, because I appreciate we're three panelists with slightly more panelists than we usually have. So that's a great challenge for me to have. We're going to be talking a little bit about games and businesses, about raising the profile of them and raising awareness of them. The question that I had for you was going to be about basically this: what are the similarities and differences between the two when you're trying to work at it? Because there's probably a little bit of a different art to raising the profile around in games and a business, but some areas where your tactics can potentially overlap?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because it obviously, you know, a business is a very broad statement. There's a lot of businesses that do a lot of different things, but we work a lot within gaming, but also with businesses kind of outside of gaming. And I would say that one of the main kind of differences you will see, and I'm not going to look at games versus other businesses, but I'm going to look at businesses that have a product versus the businesses that have a service or software that you can kind of participate in. You have to kind of look at very different strategies when it comes to, it's kind of like the user journey of getting a game versus buying a product versus, you know, starting a subscription. They're all kind of very different routes that people take. So I think that strategies for looking at businesses versus games, for example, it makes sense to start at the same place. You really want to kind of start at user data. You really want to kind of start at kind of the very the reasons, what kind of people do you want to target? What do you want to achieve? How many downloads do you want? How many sales do you want? You kind of want to go there, and then you want to look at what the audience that you're looking into, what do they like? Like, who do they watch? What sort of stuff do they do in their free time? So I think it's something that I think is really cool about how marketing and PR have evolved in the past, let's say 20 years, is that we look much more at what do you enjoy, as opposed to your kind of purchasing patterns, for example, or like the demographic that you can kind of neatly fit into. And I think that's really cool because it's so much more like granular and specific. And I think it's very similar. I think basically it's a really difficult question because businesses are a wide range of stuff, and some businesses are going to be way more similar to kind of how you would sell a game. I think that a lot of people would kind of approach it with, you know, gamers are a specific audience. I don't necessarily fully agree with, yes they are, but I wouldn't necessarily fully agree with it because, you know, define gamers. If you say gamers, who do you mean by that? Because if you look at like Gen Z, for example, 1% of them play video games. Video games are more kind of culturally relevant to them than music and film combined. So, you know, who is a gamer to you? So I think that it's basically a very difficult question.
It's a very difficult question, and it's one I'm no, that's fine, and it's one I'm going to probe James with as well, because I'm well aware, obviously, in terms of your business, you do have that two sides to it, where you are doing the promotion of games on behalf of companies, but also actually working with businesses themselves to build their reputation. So what's your take on that, and about the differences or similarities in terms of raising awareness?
So B2B, and I want to draw a distinction here. I'm not talking about promoting a business or a service to consumers, but literally B2B within the industry. So our clients typically can come from two different places. Often it's a SaaS platform, an analytics platform, you know, that they're trying to sell to other businesses or get them to subscribe to. And we quite often get approached by developers who actually want to increase their profile. And I've had that quite a lot. And intrinsically, we have a similar approach to both for B2B, but I always tell people that B2B is much longer sales cycle. So definitely there's very little impulse factor here. You know, you've got to give it 6 months plus. I think the key to B2B is about authenticity and building trust. It's not about spamming out press releases saying how fantastic you are all the time. You know, the approach we have is called inbound PR. So it's very much based on an inbound marketing methodology. But what I say to clients is, effectively, we sit down, we look at your target customers, we then develop personas. Yeah, what are those people? Their job titles. What are their pain points and their problems? Once we understand what their pain points and their problems are, then invariably we create content that engenders trust and thought leadership, and by sharing with them, that helps answer those problems. Now, for us, most of the time, the good quality content that we're trying to create normally comes from data and insight. And data insight tends to come from two places. The first place is a lot of our clients have got a platform. So the very best place to do it is their own platform, you know, where they can extract data, we can analyze it or work with them to analyze it, and then we'll package it up into a podcast, ebook, blog post, infographic, LinkedIn post, loads and loads of different ways. The other way you get data is surveys, or our surveys. So typically you could do an industry survey. You go out and you poll 1,000 developers, you could poll 1,000 marketing managers, and then you're shining a light on habits, on attitudes, and making people aware of the pulse of the industry on a certain issue. But yeah, I'd say that B2B is a slow burn. It's not cheap because it does require diligent stream of content that isn't just 800-word blog post. It is a lot of stuff, and it is very much data and insight based. And then, of course, on top of that, just to finish off, certainly from the PR side, you know, PR is a distribution channel from that data, but, you know, not everyone we deal with has data to announce or insight. You know, we often work with people that have been acquired. They may have secured a really big round of funding. They may have hired a very notable person. They may be putting out something that they've seen. It doesn't always have to be data-based, but for an ongoing relationship and to sort of build that retainer we have with clients, it's always going to come from really good quality insight. It just has to, in order to engage your target prospects. There you go. That was a short answer.
That very much was the short answer. No, thank you very much. No, I mean, it's a really challenging and complicated question as well. So yes. I think it's one of those things where, you know, there might be some similarities in the sense that you may be thinking about a similar kind of set of tactics, but the way you're executing it could be completely and entirely different. So you need to think carefully about what your goal is. You know, if you're promoting your business, it's going to be thinking much more about James's approach, whereas promoting a game is going to take a different thing. Which, speaking of which, Melissa, going into building a plan, right? How do we build plans? Because I think one of the key things about having a plan is that there is almost no world in which I've managed to successfully keep to one of them, but having it in the first place is pretty important for a number of reasons, right?
Absolutely. So this is kind of my bread and butter. So I started as client strategy manager, writing the strategy plans for clients marketing, and now as head of client strategy, I'm basically kind of managing the team doing that. So this is what I do day in, day out. It's absolutely imperative that you have some sort of marketing plan for a game. I cannot stress this enough. If only so that whoever you are working with to do your PR can sleep well at night. When I do a plan, I always like to start with research. Now that's partially because of my background. I did a PhD before I got into games, so I'm very like research driven in my mindset. But I think it is a good principle. Think about who has achieved the success that you want, right? Who's got something similar, a game that you look at and you think, oh God, like if my game got the kind of coverage that got, then that would be amazing. Don't be silly about it. Don't be like, oh yeah, you know, Breath of the Wild, that's really my competitor. That's not really realistic for most people. But do have a look at kind of similar games to yours that are, you know, that are out there on the market quite recently, and look at what they did and what worked for them and what didn't. Who was writing about them? Who was, you know, who was playing them on Twitch and on YouTube? What kinds of things were they doing with their social media? Like, were they bothering with all these things, or were they, you know, going down a completely different route? What's right for a, you know, kind of narrative-driven game on the Nintendo Switch might be completely wrong for a free-to-play mobile game. You know, it's important that you're situating yourself correctly. Beyond that, I think that the other thing, you know, aside from gathering as much data and information as you can about kind of what other people are doing, is really infusing a plan with personality. It's, you know, we talked about authenticity. I know James mentioned authenticity is important for kind of B2B marketing. It's also very important for that kind of B2C side of things. You need to really think about your messaging and what your USPs are. And one of the places where an external agency can be helpful is that because you're so close to a project as a creator and as an artist, it can be very difficult to look at that objectively and be like, right, what are my unique selling points? What is really going to kind of get this game across to potential players? And sometimes an external view on that, even if it's just for like a couple of hours of consultation, can be really useful just to help you hammer down that messaging, making sure that it stands out, that it's not mis-selling the game. There's nothing worse than if you've kind of presented a game as one thing and then players get it and they're like, this isn't really a roguelite. You know, it's got to be truthful but also interesting. So not asking much, but those are the major things that I think need to go into a plan. What are you trying to say and how are you going to say it?
Well, exactly. And I think that's a really comprehensive and really great way of looking at it as well. And MJ, just to sort of drill further on it as well, well, one of the things as well, once you've got a plan, is how do you put it into action, right? And you're thinking about all of your different channels and all the different things that you're using. When it comes to a developer, especially someone who might be sort of time stretched, who's trying to think about, you know, what am I doing? How should they go about picking which channels they're going through in terms of level of effectiveness, and what's their best way for learning whether or not things are working? Because, you know, it can be the case that we pick something and think that's going to be the solution to everything and realize, actually, maybe that's not quite worked out. What kind of practices do they have to have in place to start learning those things as they go along?
Yeah, I think something that is really important is to kind of be realistic about the resources and the time that you have, because I think that a lot of people feel like, oh, obviously we have to have Twitter, and then we have to have Instagram, and then we have to have Twitch, and then we have to have, you know, whatever else. But realistically, if you are developing your own game, or if you're a very small studio, then you're probably really only going to have time for one of those, and to only do one of those properly. And I would say, don't feel like you have to be present everywhere. For a small developer, I would usually say Twitter is probably going to be your best shot. you have to look at platforms that give you an opportunity to reach people that don't follow you. So that crosses off Instagram and Facebook off the list, because both Instagram and Facebook are using algorithms which basically mean that only people who already engaged with you, already follow you, or are already aware of you are going to see your posts. You don't want that. You want Twitter, which could mean that one retweet suddenly puts you in front of, you know, that person's however many followers, which is great. But you might want to look into other platforms if you'd like. So another platform that does have a potential to reach people that don't follow you already is obviously Twitch, a platform we do a lot of work with our clients in the tabletop and trading card game industry is TikTok, which is super fun and great for that. So I think that you just basically, you need to be realistic. You need to feel comfortable on the platform, which I think, you know, we all feel comfortable on Twitter, too comfortable, some of us. By that I mean me. And I think that we can basically look at what you can do, look at the platforms that make sense. And one thing, I think Melissa really covered everything about kind of the, you know, how to go around the plan. One thing that I would also suggest, especially for small indie devs, but also, you know, for everyone else, is not just because you're creating a game does not mean that you have to reach people through gaming creators or gaming press. You're not limited to that. If you're creating a game that's a farming sim and you think there is, or you have data that supports that there is a big crossover between you and like people who watch cooking shows, let's go for it. Genuinely go for it, because that's probably going to be more cost effective for you than going after gaming content creators. And it's going to be interesting because it could bring audiences that would never even consider getting your game, because they didn't know games could be as fun as your game. So that's basically, yeah, that's how I would go. Essentially, be realistic with yourself when it comes to time and resources, because you don't want to overwork yourself or overpromise to yourself on your marketing strategy and then feel like you're failing. You don't need that, especially as a part of a small team or an indie dev. So that would be my main piece of advice there.
So it's a great piece of advice. And actually, you know, we're coming towards the end of the panel, but we've got a few questions in the Q&A. So I'm actually going to go and jump over to them. So I'm going to go to Katie Barclay's question first. Awesome gathering, loving the indies too, Melissa. So there we go. Get a little bit of a shout out for you, Melissa. I'd like to know about any magic sauce that you discovered early on in your careers to get that sweet coverage. For me, early on in mine, it's all about building relationships. So it'd be good to hear your own early on experiences and what worked for you. Thank you. Well, actually, I'm going to probably hog this one just for a second, just because in terms of getting coverage, I mean, in terms of my job, I guess one of the things that's interesting about promoting what we're doing is we have to explain the industry in a way that someone who has no interest in games is going to get an interest in there. So I have something that's called the mum test, which is that I'll phone my mum up and talk a bit about my work and go, you know, what are you thinking about this, and what are you thinking about this kind of story? And surprisingly enough, like when I'm talking about a barometer for what ends up actually landing in the mainstream, it's a remarkably good way of doing so, because when I've talked to her about, say, when we did our partnership with the National Literacy Trust and about how games were shown to improve levels of literacy amongst boys and irregular readers, she was able to sort of talk back to me and be instantly like, that's really interesting. That's made me think about this in a different way. And I always tend to think that what leads to coverage is often something that sparks that interest, where someone's sitting there writing and goes, I didn't think about that, or, oh, that's really interesting. And then that kind of goes and leads on. So that one's my one. I would suggest that phoning my mum is not an applicable test for everyone in here. That, you know, I mean, I of course can circulate her number afterwards. But James, I mean, could you give potentially more practical tip than that for Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bit of a hack on this, or a shortcut, because my experience aside, about 2 years ago, we did I think it's the only game reviewer survey that's been done, and we're going to be updating it soon. And it's a shameless plug, but if you do go to our website at Big Games Machine and look in the resources section, you can download it. And we did one with Keymailer last year for influencers, where we asked them their attitudes as well. And really what we were trying to do is find commonalities on reasons that reviewers accept and reject games for review. And there were some really clear things that came out, which kind of obvious, I suppose, to those of us in PR. But the most important thing by far is relevance. Yeah, like the worst mistake that I think most developers do is they get somebody to collate this enormous list of journalists or whatever, and they just spam it out, and it feels really impersonal. Whereas actually, it's far better to curate a list of journalists. For example, if you say, well, these are my 3 competitors, then I'm going to go and so I'm going to find people that are in notable publications that have written about those games. So I know they've got a pre-existing interest in that game. So there's your relevance box ticked, right? And then it's really down to the art of writing them a succinct pitch, which doesn't wax lyrical with loads of bullshit hyperbole about how wonderful your game is. Just succinctly say what the elevator pitch, as everyone calls it. What reason are you going to give them in 2 lines why your game is worth looking at over and above any other ones that they may have looked at as well? And so you've got to kind of know that you're targeting people with relevance, and B, that you're pitching to them in a succinct and not a waffly, hyperbolic way. Is that a word, George? You're more erudite than I am.
Yes, hyperbolic is a word.
Thank you. Where in which you can succinctly, I said, get it across in 2 or 3 points, and that generally tends to work. You know, obviously presentation is important. If the game looks like a dog, it's not going to get very far in your screenshots, but that's kind of a given, as well as, I suppose, giving really good assets as well to pique the interest, or a trailer of the journalist. That's an important thing.
Fantastic. And so we're now going to shift over quickly to a question from Ben Townsend, which is, I think this one might be good for you, MJ, as well, based on what you were talking about earlier, was what would you recommend new indie studios who are developing their first game do to grow their social media platforms, to grow their audience? Are there any sort of specific tips on top of what you've already said that you might suggest for Ben?
Yeah, I think that obviously what I've said before, focus on one platform and then look at people who are relevant to your audience. And again, don't kind of fall into a trap of looking only at gamers. They don't need to be gamers. I actually believe, and you know, it has worked for me in the past, that you have better luck going to an influencer who doesn't do gaming and go to them and be like, hey, I think you'd really like to play this game and I can give you a code, as opposed to someone who is a gaming creator and gets, you know, 1 million of those messages every day. So that would be my kind of advice. You want to really kind of piggyback off someone else's audience, and you have to figure out the best way to do it. So there's just so many ways, but one thing, for example, let's say there is a content creator you really like, you might approach them and be like, hey, do you want to be an NPC in my game? And then they will be probably like, yeah, that's such a cool idea. They'll be on board and they'll start talking about your game. You can get your art people to do a fan art of a creator if it's a really big creator that you want to kind of get their attention. You can get them in the game. You can ask them to do VO, or you can, you know, approach them with something like that. There is a variety of different ways you can basically approach people, kind of get them involved. Another thing, just really quickly, is to when you start building that community, show them you appreciate them, let them help you with your design decisions. I am going to say that one of the kind of indie games that are about to come out that are doing this really well, it's Paralives, which are obviously super popular because they're supposed to be like the pretty much fast competitor the Sims series had since forever, but they are really engaging and involving their community in the process, and that in turn allows them to grow, and people really appreciate that. So that's another thing I would say, that once you already have that audience, focus a lot on making them happy, because they will bring more people in, and you're not going to have to kind of constantly rely on creators and PR, etc. You can kind of organically grow your audience that way.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think we're going to actually have to tie things off here, because I think we're right at the end of our time. But I wanted to say very, very quickly to everyone, thank you very much for being involved. It's been a fascinating discussion. I'm sure that if there is, if there are any further questions, you'd be more than happy to take them. And I know that Leon, who's going to jump up in a moment back onto the virtual stage, will give a little bit of information about potentially being able to chat with them afterwards in Gathertown, aren't you, Leon?